Let's talk about very briefly this idea around the next um, COVID stimulus being bipartisan in nature. I do not believe that the focus needs to be on bipartisanship as much as it needs to be on actually addressing sufficiently, effectively, and efficiently the challenge we face, the challenge of COVID, right? And not just the challenge that we face in that it's ravaged our bodies, it's also ravaged our economy. And again, we cannot focus as much on bipartisanship as much as we need to focus on actually addressing the issue. I think it's, quite honestly, I think it's convenient that, for instance, when we saw those tax cuts passed under Trump, bipartisanship wasn't thought about, right? We always think about bipartisanship at the most inconvenient times for the American people. We want to talk about being bipartisan when it comes to getting health care. We want to talk about being bipartisan when it comes to tax credits for the average American. We want to talk about bipartisanship when it comes to providing financial relief to Americans when a pandemic is ravaging the not just our country but our entire world. We want to talk about bipartisanship when it comes to funding education. We want to talk about bipartisanship when it comes to feeding hungry children, right? But we don't talk about bipartisanship when it comes to those martini tax cuts, right? We don't think about it then. Super convenient, super freaking convenient. I did an entire episode talking about the lessons that we can learn about COVID relief simply by examining what the Trump administration did. And while I think that those are important lessons, and feel free to go back and listen to that episode, I think that the real lesson that needs to be learned here by the Democrats is that they cannot be the party of capitulation. If they do capitulate, they need to capitulate not to the other side, but to their actual constituents. I do understand that, yes, there is the donor class that they have to worry about because, unfortunately, how we do our campaigning in this country, campaign finance does require you to have mass amounts of capital, and that capital has to come from donors, right? And I could kind of go down this rabbit hole of talking about why you need to get involved and why you need to be considered part of the donor class, regardless of how much you can give. But I'm not going to do that, right? Because I'm not focused on that during this episode. But I will say this, that I think it's unrealistic to think that they won't consider their donor class, but I think that we cannot afford for the donor class to be the exclusive focus for politicians. Democrats have an opportunity here to really capitalize on keeping political power for more than just what the historical norm is. The historical norm is, you keep power for one cycle and then it shifts to the other side because voters are unhappy, and then it shifts back and forth, kind of like a ping pong ball. Considering the extraordinary circumstances and conditions in which we find ourselves, if Democrats actually rise to meet the challenge, they can buck the norm. They can go against the historical norms that we have seen in politics in this country. And I say this not as someone who is like a super Democrat supporter. I'm not, right? And I'm being very personal with you, right? I have their ideals on the right that I think are that have mass amounts of value, not just for me personally, but for our society. But then there are actions on the right that I think are completely crazy that I cannot get down with, right? On the left, there are some ideas that I'm like, these people are so far removed from reality. I don't know if they're smoking something, right? But then at the same time, there are actions that I see on the left that are like, hey, you know what? Well, I think that some of their ideas are crazy. They actually, more often than not, actually try to help people in a way that can be beneficial to them. So again, I'm not saying this, I'm not saying this as someone who is like this super Democrat. I talk all the time about the problems I have, for instance, with Nancy Pelosi. If you listen to any of our episodes last year, towards the end of the year, when they were in negotiations around the second COVID stimulus that we received, I made it very clear. Yeah, like Nancy's right on this, right? She's when you consider her position as opposed to the other side, I think that she is the party with kind of the right idea here. But personally, I think Nancy would be on the corners doing abortions herself if she could, right? She's not someone I personally, but it's not about me personally. It's about our country. And that's where a lot of us have to get to. But speaking about our country, if the Democrats play their cards right, if they stop capitulating and stop kind of, saying we have to be bipartisan, like Republicans were not bipartisan when they wanted to accomplish their agenda. Democrats need to understand, and they need to understand that there is a lot of frustration when you consider. I talk about all the times about how politics is about perception and it's about optics and what you see. What Americans have recently seen from the other side, for a lot of us, that still has lit a fire within us that is burning and fuels an anger against the other side, especially as we look at, for instance, what's going on with the Senate impeachment trial. We all saw that video yesterday, right? That recalled the events of January 6th. And for a lot of us, well, for a lot of people, you had the event on the 6th and then you hear about it and then it kind of goes away and you just kind of like in your memory, it kind of fades. But for a lot of us, that was brought up again yesterday. Now, I'm not saying you like need to do it in a way of like manipulating people, but as they say, don't let a crisis go to waste, right? Republicans don't let a crisis go to waste. They took the crisis of 9/11. And how long have we been at war? Right? So take this crisis and politically use it to your advantage. You can have the best of both worlds. You can have political power and you can retain that power. But you can only do that if you make your constituents happy. So this idea of capitulating and saying, oh, well, let's negotiate on this, or, and now to their credit, I will say, given that it has been confirmed that we are going to approach this next form of stimulus using reconciliation as opposed to kind of normal rules and procedures, that is one thing that, again, to their credit, demonstrates that, okay, they're kind of bucking the norm here. They're doing things, they're kind of playing ball how the other side played ball. But they need to remember that. Don't waver from that. Because the ball is in your court and Democrats need to learn this lesson. Otherwise, come 2022, we are going to go back to the historical norm where something, whether it's the House or the Senate, will shift to control of the Republicans. And you think we have gridlock now while you have some things to your advantage? We will certainly have gridlock then, right? So they need to keep that in mind, because this idea around we need bipartisan support for the next, that's crazy. What are you smoking? Right? Like, no, that's utterly absurd. Fact is, most Americans support not just another round of COVID relief, but they want that next package to be big. Right? We've already heard and seen Janet Yellen come out and talk about, yo, Well, she didn't say yo. She said, hey. She didn't say hey either, but she said, you people. She didn't say that either. Just kind of putting that in there. But she said, look, if we can actually be in a better position come 2022 rather than riding this out till 2025 if we actually go big, if we see this $1.9 trillion plan passed. So these people coming out here peddling this $600 billion plan, you're smoking. You're either smoking something or you seriously underestimate the intelligence of the American people. We tried going small before and it doesn't work. Most Americans do not support going small. So these people come into the table thinking, oh, I know I want to go big, but I got to go small because I got to be bipartisanship. That's not what you should be focusing on. Don't focus on being bipartisan. Focus on actually addressing the issue. That's the equivalent of a firefighter coming to a burning house saying, okay, this house is burning. I have the hose. It's connected to the thing, to the pipe, whatever, wherever the water comes from. And then, I'm going to turn it on and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to put out this fire, but rather than put out the fire, I need to think about, how much water I need to use, right? Like, no, just turn on the hose. And yes, you might have some water damage, but you can deal with water damage to a certain extent, but a completely burned down house, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think you can do anything with that. Americans support a massive relief package. I don't understand why there's a question. The only bipartisanship that Democrats need to be worried about is the bipartisanship of the American people, not just getting bipartisanship buy-in or bipartisan buy-in from the other side. Just my opinion.